Well, it's the Love Your Life Workshop, right, Reynolds?
Woohoo!
I said it's the Love Your Life Workshop, right?
Exactly right. And this is who you love the most.
That's right. I have so many jokes today.
Narrow them down. Just give us the best one.
And I was going to say, but I think I've told this one. I was going to say, there's a guy walks into a bar, end of the day, and he's frustrated. He screams out, "Lawyers are idiots." The guy at the end of the bar says, "I'm offended by that." He said, "Are you a lawyer?" He said, "No, I'm an idiot." But tomorrow's the Iowa caucus, right? Is it tomorrow? So I've heard that Donald Trump's current wife is not excited. She didn't really want to be first lady. She said she didn't want to move into a smaller house. You didn't like that one?
He's walking out.
That would be.
Trump supporter.
Anyway, so welcome. So if I had a glass here and it's filled halfway up, the old question, is it half empty or half full? Right? And so if you say, well, it's half empty, then supposedly you're a pessimist and you think things aren't going to work out. If it's half full, if you say half full, then it means you're an optimist and you think things are going to be good and things are going to get better. Or whatever, however you want to define that. But I want to think a little bit about kind of dismissing that question, because in a way, both opinions are kind of a victim mentality. I'm not going to go way into this, but in a way, if I say my glass is half empty, circumstances are not going to work out, I'm kind of a victim of my circumstances. If I say it's half full, circumstances are going to make me happy and fill up my glass. I'm kind of a victim in that way too. And I've known people, I've lived long enough to know people who were great optimists early in life to become pessimists and kind of negative later in life. But anyway, so let's dismiss that for a second. I want to talk about being glass fillers. And look at the glass, not only ours, but as others, as being a glass filler. Or being someone who fills the glass to overflowing. That's kind of maybe our work in this world is to be glass fillers or glass overflowers. And from wherever the glass is. So what does it mean to have your glass overflowing? So I'll tell you some things I wrote down that it doesn't mean. If your glass is overflowing, it doesn't mean you have a pain-free life. I think we're all lived enough to know that is not a pain-free life. And yet we need to be reminded of that the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. To say, well, I want my glass to be overflowing, because when pain comes into our life, don't we feel like it's robbing us of our joy, of our overflowing glass?
Care about people count too.
What's that?
Care about other people.
Yeah. It also doesn't depend on our circumstances. And I think it's a difficult one as well. And there's a line in the Bible where Paul says, I've learned to be content in any circumstance. And that's quite a statement, because here's a guy who was kind of on top of society. He had position, power, and he gave it all up, and he was traveling, he was shipwrecked, he was jailed, he was beaten. And in fact, he may have written this line from jail and say, I've learned how to be content in any circumstance. My circumstance does not determine whether or not my cup is overflowing. And that's not to say that's easy, because our circumstances certainly affect us. And yet, maybe when our circumstances affect us, it's another chance to kind of dig down deep and say, is this what determines my overflowing cup? Also, the overflowing glass doesn't remove problems or mean there are no problems. And I've always loved that line that Jesus says to his disciples, you know, I've come into this world to give you joy. He goes, and in this world, you have trouble. You know, he puts those hand in hand. In fact, he said, one of his statements to them around that time was, what I want is for your joy to be complete, your cup to be overflowing. But now, in this world, you have trouble. What a great statement. And also, your cup overflowing does not constantly produce smiles. You know. And also, and this is another thing that we know, but it's good to be reminded, it doesn't come necessarily from accomplishments, money, position, those things. You know. But it's good to be reminded that we're reminded of it almost daily from stories. You know, I think of Robin Williams and many stories after that. I think of people that I've heard of who were famous and had everything and died and in their last days were just bitter people. And so that's what an overflowing glass is not. Now, here's some things that I want to throw out there that an overflowing glass is. When I say that I want to be preoccupied in life with, not am I an optimist or pessimist, but am I part of this overflowing glass, participating in it, also contributing to it? One is, an overflowing glass is simply a peaceful heart. A peaceful heart. A peaceful heart that we can have in any circumstance. And I think that that doesn't always come naturally, but it is something that we can work towards as we deal with every situation in life. I love the story of the storm when the disciples were scared for their lives, and Jesus is asleep. And of course, in the story, he wakes up and he calms the storm, and that's kind of the big story. Jesus calmed the storm, performed that miracle. But I've grown to think that the most amazing part of that story is that he was asleep. They were literally scared for their lives, and he was asleep. And he had this peaceful heart. He understood the circumstances, and he kind of understood where they were going. And it was also maybe teaching them a lesson, but still, he had this sense of peace in the storm. So we have this peaceful heart. The Bible also describes it as peace that passes understanding. You know, that some people may look and say, how can you be at peace with all this stuff going on? And yet, deep inside, we have this center of peace. Doesn't always mean we know what to do. Doesn't always mean there isn't stress going on outside of us. Good stress and bad stress. But we have a peaceful heart. Or as the Old Testament says in one line, be still and know that I'm God. Be still. There's a place for stillness and this peace. But we can also aim for this stillness in the midst of activity. You know, we can find ourselves in a really busy time and things going on, and then kind of deep down have this stillness in our heart. So overflowing glass, it comes from this peaceful heart. Also, it comes from resting, what I call resting and walking in spiritual presence. Resting and walking in spiritual, having this spiritual presence that we walk and rest in, that we understand. That is, you know, it's easy to just get where we just focus on this physical world. You know, but to walk in spiritual presence, you know, which I think is what the heroes of the Bible did. They walked with this presence. I think about Joseph in prison. You know, Joseph, 16 years old, or a young man anyway, that we think a teenager, had all these dreams. God gave him all these dreams of these great things were going to happen. And instead of this life that just like blossomed immediately, his brothers hate him, they're jealous. They think about killing him, they sell him to these people sell him to an Egyptian. He seems to be doing pretty well working for this Egyptian, gets lied about, gets thrown in prison. He is in prison, and two people in prison have dreams. He interprets their dreams. One of them gets killed as he executed. The other one gets released, and on his way out, Joseph is kind of like, don't forget me, I'm down here, you know. He forgets him. So he's in this dungeon another year, 2 years, and finally the Pharaoh wants to have his dreams interpreted, and this guy says, oh yeah, remember this guy who interpreted my dreams. And he pulls them out, you know. And I would imagine it would be so easy at this point that any thought of spiritual presence in your life had just gone out the window. I mean, he's lived long enough and gone through enough that he could say, those dreams I had when I was young, those are stupid. You know, what was I thinking? Look at life. And I can see him getting out and saying, I don't, you know, maybe even making up what bears. But his immediate response was, I don't interpret dreams. God does. So, I don't think he was sitting in prison with a big smile on his face. I don't think he never had a cynical moment. I don't think he never had a discouraged moment. I think he lived, but he had this deep sense of spiritual presence still in his life as this mystery of life unfolded. So, and it's also this idea of a question. I think it's a question in this world of sometimes, am I really known? Am I really known in this world? You know? And I think it's a fundamental question. Am I really known? Does God really know me? However you want to, am I really known? And I think about the story of when Jesus was calling his disciples, and I remember sitting in Bible studies where we just talked about this, trying to figure out what this means. When he called Nathaniel and he said, yeah, I saw you the other day under the fig tree. And Nathaniel like falls down and worships him. And we're like, what in the world was going on here? And I think it simply is like, I know you. Yeah, I wasn't there, but I know you. And it's the same thing with the woman at the well, who Jesus seemed to know everything about her life. This little, seemingly insignificant, just human being in the midst of humanity, eking out her living in this little town in Samaria, having to go out and draw water, and then this spiritual presence says, I know you. You know, it's amazing. And to wrestle with that question, to think about that question, am I known? And I think that's to walk in a spiritual presence and to ask, to what extent is I'm known? And I've said for a while, I think some of the big questions are, does God know me? Does he care? And is he involved? You know, and those are questions still I kind of live with and walk with. So those two things are kind of what it means to have a cup overflowing, to have a peaceful heart in the midst of everything, and to walk in a spiritual presence, and to ask, am I known? So much of what I grew up in religion focuses on what we know. And I think sometimes they focus more on not what we know, but that we are known. And I think that was the thing of Paul's life that he came to. Remember when he talked about love, and he says, someday we're going to know. He says, right now we see everything is kind of murky, and someday we're going to know completely, just as we are known. Just as we are known. And that tells me a couple things, that this great writer, Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, says things look murky to me sometimes. Things look hazy. I don't know everything, but I believe that I am known. You know, I think that's a critical thing. So now the third thing, there's three here that I have, is that to have a glass overflowing is we tap into what I call a deep energy. Is to daily tap into this deep energy, which maybe is connected with this peace and connected with this spiritual presence, but we learn to tap into deep energy. And the way I like to describe this is that we all have feelings. Everybody has feelings, different feelings, and feelings come from all kinds of places, right? Feelings about things, feelings about ourselves, feelings about the day, and feelings can change like that, can't they? Sometimes my feeling can change based on, I was telling somebody one day I was just feeling down and no energy, and I ate a can of tuna and I perked up. And suddenly I'm more optimistic about the world from eating a can of tuna, you know? That's the way it happens sometimes. And to recognize that the sun can come out and I walk out in the sun and just feel a little better. And not to make light of things, but we have feelings, and they can affect us, and they should. Or we can suppress them, you know, and all that. But I like to think of a deeper layer of feelings, and I call it convictions. That we have feelings, and then there's this very deep undercurrent, this deep layer of feelings called convictions. And out of convictions is where we really want to live. And it's not like we go around every day thinking real deeply necessarily, but we learn to tap into this layer of convictions, which may sometimes be different than the layer of feelings that's on top, you know. But the conviction level, I think, is the level that we talk about when we say, be the person you most want to be. And sometimes it means filtering through all these feelings down to this person that I really want to be. The kind of person I love, the kind of person I most want to be. So that, you know, I could be angry with somebody at work, or they can annoy me, and then I stop and I kind of tap into this deeper conviction, and I remember some things, and I think about that this is another human being, and that I don't really know, because it's so easy to form judgments or labels and those sort of things, and realize that they're a human being that deals with everything that I deal with in this world. So this deeper layer of conviction is where compassion springs out. It's where courage comes from, encouragement, all these things. So it's learning to tap into this deeper level of hope and encouragement and compassion. Now, so a couple of things I'd like to mention, like to think about what I think are practical things about. So how do we tap in for ourselves and for others in a practical way to this glass overflowing, this deeper layer where people live that sometimes doesn't get nurtured. But it's the most important part of ourselves to get nurtured. And one is what I call, in a sense, being, I'm going to call it a flip. We flip the switch. So we become a switch flipper. But we learn how to flip the switch.
Wasn't that the name of your first band, the Switch Flippers?
Yeah. No, but it might be a good name. Learn how to flip the switch. You know, sometimes the difference between having a sour outlook and having a better outlook is just we flip the switch. Sometimes we have to do it for ourselves. Sometimes somebody does it for us. You know, but to be able to have that switch just change, and how it can change in an instant. What an amazing thing. I had experience Friday, I think it was. I got in the car to go to work, and I never stop at 7-Eleven on my way to work. I almost every day stop at Wawa. And I left, and I thought, you know, I'm just going to grab some gas at 7-Eleven and go on to work. And I stopped at 6 in the morning. It was cold. It was windy. I jump out, and this guy is emptying the garbage outside for 7-Eleven. He comes over to the pumps, and you know, he says something like, "Good morning, how are you?" And I was just going to give some one word, you know, fine. But there's something in myself that still is tempted to say something negative. I seem like I grew up my life with people saying, how are you? And hearing people say, well, kind of like, well, I have to go to work. What do you expect? Or, something like
No use complaining.
being half funny, but a little cynical, Here it is, 6 o'clock. I'm at 7-Eleven. I'm in a hurry. It's freezing. What are you doing? And I kind of caught myself. So I flipped the switch a little bit, and I said just something like, yeah, I'm pretty good this morning. Pretty good. And I looked at him. I said, how are you? And he says, oh, I'm living the dream. He says, I'm working at 7-Eleven. I'm living the dream, And it was kind of interesting because a little cynical, but he had a little gleam in his eye, And without really thinking, I said, well, we're alive. We're both alive and we're making it, right? And he kind of caught himself, so it kind of flipped a switch for him, and he said something, yeah, and I got kind of quiet, and I said, well, I said I worked part-time. I said I was out of work and worked part-time for like 4 years, and I said, but really, I learned a lot. And he said, well, that's where I am right now. And I'm working 7-Eleven part-time. He said, but you know what? He said, I worked in concrete all my life. He said, this is my first time working inside. He said, my back's not hurting. My hands feel good. I feel good. He said, I'm not making a lot of money, but I'm making it. He says, but it's really, suddenly he went from kind of being cynical to, hey, there's something going on here, something good, and I thought, what a cool guy, what a neat guy. But I also thought of how my response could have directed that whole conversation into just cynicism and negativity. And we kind of flipped that switch for each other. And in our little casual moments throughout the day, we have a chance to flip a switch, what seemed like a very insignificant thing, but is really very significant. That encounter, really stayed with me and meant a lot to me during that day, whereas it could have just been a little like, let's be negative about our lives, our jobs, how little we're paid, having to be at 7-Eleven and all that sort of thing. So learn to flip that switch. The last thing is, and I kind of throw this out, this could be a discussion for another day, but that in seeing our mission in life as being cup fillers, this thought has been with me all week that we're here to be defenders, or in football terms, or sports terms, sometimes they say the best offense is a good defense. And I was thinking about how much emphasis there is in the Bible on defending. In the Old Testament, defend the fatherless. Defend the fatherless. And in all that was happening in all the stories of the Old Testament, you still read these words from God, take care of the one coming into your country from outside. Defend the fatherless and the widows. And in fact, in the New Testament, James, the brother of Jesus, writing his book, he says, if you want to sum up religion, and he didn't say anything about an institution, he says, it's taking care of widows and orphans. And keeping yourself, or your heart, you might say, from being polluted. But taking care of one, defending people who are defenseless. And that kind of sometimes goes beyond and gets our imagination going beyond just our daily lives and whether or not our glass is half full or half empty. But to look around and have this kind of attitude that comes from our conviction of, what God is really about is defending and taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. So that brings on encouragement, that brings on compassion, that brings on forgiveness, that brings out grace, brings out love, patience, all those things. When my job is in my way, if you want to call it my job, or my challenge is to have this outlook of filling the cup, especially of those who need defending. So anyway, that's I think that's all I have. I have more jokes, but that's what I've been thinking about. So I'll lay it out on the table there.
I always believe in helping people out and caring about people, and you treat people decent, respectfully, you get that back. And I don't care about money. Money's not everything in life. But the thing is, people I care about. Nice people, I do it. My heart goes out to them. I do anything for them. And I want to. I care. I give a damn. I know it's hard times out there. But if everybody would just work together and just show a little respect and show them love, no, not love, but you know what I mean. The regular, just talk nice. Be nice. And that goes a long way. That makes people's days go better. Because life is not easy. And they work, everybody's working to make a living. They're always, I never thought I was worth anything because I was just a barber. I came for 50 years. I never had fancy jobs, I never had big money or anything like that. I've been coming into some big money. But that's what they had, this isn't what I had. I always had to work for a dime. I worked. I would cut hair 8 hours a day, work super 8 hours a day. I was a janitor in school. I had 4 children I had to raise. I had a wife and 4 children. And I had responsibility. The thing is, you gotta do what you gotta do, but it's rough out there. People work. They're just trying to get by and make a living. But show respect. Show a little bit of kindness to people. And kindness goes a long way.
Yep.
Show a little kindness that makes your day go brighter. Lifted spirits, and they go home with this lifted spirit, and they're nice to the family. Nicer to the family. That's what I mean.
Well said.
So I mean, what you said about the glass half empty and half full and how it affects our lives. I mean, you could say that that's what everything comes down to, because you can look at any circumstance you're in and be miserable or be thankful. But but especially what you said at the end. Sometimes it's easy to forget that when we make that choice about how we're going to think about our lives, how it can inspire people around us and affect people around us, and it just made me think, or affect them negatively if we decide to go the other way and just be sort of, think about all the things we don't have or the negative things in our lives. But it just these 3 things popped in my head, and they popped like simultaneously. But just to share it, Big Mike, when he, I'll never forget when he got his teeth pulled. They were all rotting out. He went to the dentist and got all his front teeth pulled, 4 of them, right? So he looked like a toddler with the no front teeth, right? And he showed up to church that day. I remember in the old church, Mike used to start the ceremony by walking up front, by galloping up front, and sitting down on the edge of the stage and talk about everything that was going on in the church, and so that day he had got all his teeth pulled, and Mike was just this gregarious, happy person who was smiling and screaming, and he just got up there and he said, "Look, I got no teeth." A big smile. And he just smiled and shouted and acted exactly the same way. And I thought, if it was me up there, and I still do this sometimes, I'm missing one tooth over here. And sometimes I find myself, I don't want to laugh like this because, you know what I mean? It'll show that tooth. And, he just was like, I don't care, I have teeth, I have no teeth, I'm going to think about all the great things in my life. And it was just absolutely inspiring to me. Absolutely inspiring. And then the other, and then